Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Liz Harvey Roberts. I am the Chief Development Officer for the California chapter of the Nature Conservancy. So right now I'd like to introduce you all to Rod Kelsey. He's Associate Director of the Water Program, as I mentioned before, here in California, and he leads our dynamic water management strategy, which he'll explain in a minute. But first, Rod, I think we'd all love to hear about how you came into conservation.
Great. Thank you, Liz, and really thank you everybody for attending this webinar. It means a lot to us, and I'm excited to get to share with you today.
So dynamic water management is a term that most of us don't use every day. It's kind of a mouthful. So why don't you tell us what that means?
Okay, great. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity to share more about our dynamic water management strategy within the water program at the Nature Conservancy, and in particular spend some time sharing with you a new effort within that strategy, an environmental water trust. But before I get into that, I want to give you some of the context about the California water system and the challenges we face. California has one of the most engineered water infrastructure systems in the world, with thousands of miles of canals that allow all of us to tap into fresh water instantaneously, really. And it's water that's coming from our snowpack, our mountain watersheds, our rivers, and even our underground aquifers. And it's really been built and managed to harness water for people almost exclusively. And this system is actually overprescribed, meaning that significantly more water is promised to users than is actually available to meet the needs of both people and nature a lot of the time. And so we come up short a lot. And not only that, it's an aging system that's not particularly flexible and isn't really up to the challenge that we face ahead, especially with climate change. Our seasons of drought and deluge are becoming more extreme, and we're already beginning to see things like the Oroville Dam almost failing a couple of years ago, levees breaking, and even wells going dry in many communities around the state. And you might be shocked to learn that 1 million people in California don't have access to clean, affordable drinking water. And as for nature, it's fared much worse. In fact, little water is left over for our unique wildlife and these systems far too often. And so more than half of our native freshwater species and up to 90% of the amphibians and fish that are found nowhere else in the world face extinction. Species like the coho salmon could disappear in our children's lifetime. So clearly our water system is not working for people and nature the way we really would like it to. And so California is really at this crossroads in time. And as a global leader, what we do here will set the stage for change more broadly. And that's because these are global challenges, and the freshwater diversity crisis is a global problem. And so where we can reconcile the needs of people and nature, we really must. And the fact that the boom and bust cycle, in particular of flood and drought, are becoming more extreme, this means that we need to quickly experiment with the most promising solutions and then deliver those solutions at scale to help people and nature get through these challenging times. And TNC has a really important role to play in this, and that's because we're the largest conservation organization in the world. We work in 79 countries now and in all 50 states. And over our 60-year history, many people have come to know us around our land protection work, but we're really no stranger to water conservation. In California, we've been working to protect watersheds and river flows to save fish like endangered salmon and steelhead in the North Coast for over a decade. And we also created the McCloud River Preserve in the 70s to protect that unique watershed, and that's what's shown here on the left. And this happens to be one of my favorite preserves here in California. And I don't know if any of you have had a chance to visit it, but we'd love to hear from you what your favorite preserve is if you've had a chance to visit any. And so you can enter those in the chat box at the bottom of your window. And we'd be great to hear from you. We've also been working to protect watersheds and river flows to save the Amargosa River in Nevada for over 50 years. In that case, we're trying to save these freshwater systems that occur nowhere else on Earth and are currently threatened with the overuse of limited groundwater supplies. And this picture is a picture of the 7J Ranch, which is our most recent acquisition in Nevada. And over the last decade, California has been working with partners to lead the Migratory Bird Conservation Partnership. And this partnership is dedicated to protecting and restoring wetland habitats in the Central Valley to preserve migratory bird populations along the Pacific Flyway. And it's this work that really is the foundation for our dynamic conservation work today. So dynamic water management, what do we mean by that, and why is it important to our work? Well, at the heart of dynamic water management really is this idea that we need to deliver water for nature when and where it's needed most, in ways that also work for people. And the very nature of water is that it's highly variable, especially in a place like California. It's abundant at times and very scarce in others. And nature's needs are similarly dynamic. And that makes sense. It's not surprising that these systems have evolved to depend on that kind of seasonality. So for example, birds like the northern pintail, whose abundance in the Central Valley is shown here on the left, is not here all the time. They start arriving in September and October from their breeding grounds in the boreal forests and Arctic and Great Plains, and spend the winter here, depending on these wetland habitats and farmlands in some cases. Likewise, coho salmon that are returning to our coastal streams have become attuned to the natural patterns of flow, and they need pulses of spring and fall water for their migrations and to get into these streams, and they need just enough cool, clean water in the summer to breed and survive. The problem is that in many places and in many years, we're using most or all of the water in California for agriculture or other human uses at exactly those times when nature needs it as well, and often when they need it the most. For example, in the Central Valley, which once was a rich wilderness of millions of acres of wetlands, it's almost now entirely farm fields. And while these farm fields can and do sustain many of the bird populations that persist, the habitat value that they're providing is declining. And habitats particularly limited during these critical times of migration during fall and spring. And then during droughts, the habitat's really particularly limited. And similarly, in our coastal watersheds, many of the farms and residents take the water they need directly from the stream all year round. And so during the summer, when there's the least water to spare and the salmon need it the most, there's often very little, even none sometimes in some of these key streams. The thing is that these examples don't need to be either or situations. And what dynamic water management is about is trying to strike a new balance. So let me share with you an example of how this works on the ground. And many of you have probably heard about our BirdReturns program that began in 2014. And this has really been a flagship example of dynamic conservation for our chapter. Millions of birds migrate along the Pacific Flyway and depend on habitats in the Central Valley. And as I said earlier, most of those wetland habitats have disappeared in the valley. And traditional conservation would have pointed us to buying up land and restoring it and protecting habitat for those birds. But land in the Central Valley is really expensive, and it's critical to our agricultural economy. We simply can't buy our way out of this problem. And so since the birds need the habitat only temporarily, we had the idea, what if we instead of buying the habitat, what if we rented it? And so what we did is we brought innovative science and technology together to understand better exactly when and where the birds need the habitat the most, based on when there's wetland habitat on the ground, which you can see on the left here, and when the birds are their most abundant and where they are in the valley, shown here on the right. And then we created an auction program that would allow us to pay efficiently farmers to deliver great habitat at just the right times for these birds. And it turns out that we can deliver a lot of great habitat very efficiently, and it costs a fraction of more traditional solutions to conservation. And this is dynamic conservation and dynamic water management. It's delivering water where and when nature needs it the most, and doing it in a way that works for people as well. Let me give you just one more example from the North Coast, where we're working to solve the flow problem for coho and other salmon species by helping people take and store the water during the winter when it's really abundant, so they can use that water during the summer, when every last drop in the streams is vital for the salmon. In this case, for example, we're working with vineyard owners like the ones shown here to create ponds where they can store the water, take it during the winter, and then use that to irrigate their vineyards during the summer. In many ways, these probably seem like obvious solutions, and you might wonder, well, why aren't we doing this anyway? Well, moving water around in California and changing when and how it gets used in California is complicated, to say the least. Currently, the frameworks that govern how water is used and moved in California are often inflexible and maladapted to the more responsive management that we really do need, especially in a less predictable climate future. In fact, the water rights that we do have that govern who controls the water and who has the most seniority in an overallocated system was started by settlers and miners over 150 years ago during the gold rush. And then since then, we've built a system of thousands of miles of canals and infrastructure that enable us to harness all of that water, move it around the state, and we've become very, very good at moving water around California and across the West, really. Just consider the fact that 40% of San Diego's water comes from the Colorado River. But paradoxically, this engineering marvel in California also provides us an opportunity to actually engineer more natural patterns and conditions back into California's rivers and wetlands. But it comes down to who owns or controls that water, really. And acquiring and then managing that water and those water rights for environmental benefits encounters many challenges in the system. Let me give you a couple examples. So in California, if a water right is not being used, and in almost all cases that's meant for irrigation or for drinking water and other human uses, then the right to that water can be lost. It's a use it or lose it system. And we may not then be able to, after the fact, go in and acquire or protect that right and leave it there for nature, even if we wanted to. Or let's say maybe you want to leave your water in stream all the way to the ocean if you owned it. It's not automatic that somebody can't and won't just take that water out of the stream somewhere in between and use it to irrigate their crops. Or maybe you want to take the water you need in the winter when it's plentiful, store it so you can use it during the summer, just like my North Coast example. Again, that sounds simple, but it's very likely that in many cases you would face practical and legal challenges to doing that. And finally, let's say you want to consolidate all of your water that you would traditionally use over an irrigation season and deliver millions of gallons of all that water during September when birds need it the most, like we would do in our BirdReturns program. Well, by yourself, that's nearly impossible. That takes the kind of strong partnerships with water districts and other users that allows you to pool water and then deliver it all in one big gulp to these wetlands, and that's can be a real challenge in California. Now, TNC has been working through these kinds of challenges for a long time. What sets TNC apart in many ways is that we often buy into the problem. It's what we've done with land, using our preserves as platforms to demonstrate new solutions, and then working with our neighbors, ranchers and farmers and vintners to bring those solutions to create broader change. We've also done it in our fisheries work on the Central Coast. You may have heard about how we bought a small fleet in the fishing rights in Morro Bay, and then we worked with local fishermen to develop more sustainable ways of managing that fishery before we turn it all back to those communities. And so based on those experiences, we've realized that a great opportunity for us to advance dynamic water management is also by having full control of a portfolio of water rights ourselves. So we're bringing these ideas to the water world and putting a new twist on the water trust idea. We think we can use a water trust to test and demonstrate new solutions fast, much faster than we could if we were relying on working with other people's water. And that means we can then take those solutions to scale faster through policy partnerships and the work of others. Now, water trusts aren't a new idea, and I'm simplifying here, but in most cases, they've been like traditional land trusts and designed to protect water in a specific place. What's new about our approach is that we also want to deploy that water to both protect the environmental values in that place, but then also deliver it downstream so we can deliver multiple benefits in multiple places with the same water. For example, we can restore flows on a priority stream, and then using that same water right, transfer it and deliver it to wetlands on farmlands or on national wildlife refuges to create wetland habitat that's desperately needed in the same year or even in other years. And we want to implement this work actually in ways that resolve key barriers that will enable others to do the same in the coming years. And then finally, the other element of this new approach is that we want to create a trust model that's financially sustainable and actually has the potential to fuel other conservation programs as well. So how will this work? Now, believe it or not, even with all the demands put on water in California, there's actually water out there for sale. Farmers might want to sell their water because they've switched to a less water-thirsty crop, and so they can sell the water they're no longer using, or they might have an opportunity to responsibly rely more on groundwater, and so they can sell the surface water out of the streams that they've traditionally been using. We want to take advantage of this in order to assemble a portfolio of water rights that can deliver the environmental benefits that we're seeking. And to that end, we're now beginning to review and are in the midst of reviewing really a variety of water rights that are on the market. And these water rights all vary in location and in seniority and kind. And these are important variables because it really determines how we can use the water and where we can use it and when we can use it. And seniority of the water right is particularly important because it really influences how certain we can be that we can use that water in all years. In addition, some water rights are on streams where there's a flow need and we can meet that need with the water that we protect. Whereas in others, that water may come from behind Shasta Dam, and that water will be most suitable for transferring it to wetlands to create the wetland habitat for birds that I've been talking about. The point here is we're trying to assemble a portfolio of water rights, not unlike the way you'd assemble a diverse portfolio of stocks, in order to reduce our risks and increase our flexibility in the options we have. Now, you might recall that I mentioned how legally challenging moving water around can be, and that's why a really important piece of this, and then a step for us, is securing temporary 2-year options on these water rights initially. And under these option agreements with the existing water right owners, we're going to pay a moderate sum up front, and that's going to allow us to use the water as we wish for a couple years. And in that time, we'll attempt to protect the water in stream as well as do the kind of transfers downstream for wetland habitat that we intend. And in that time, we can figure out exactly how much water is for sale, how easily we can move it around, and what the operational costs are going to be of doing so. And then at the end of that 2 years, if we feel confident about an individual water right, we can outright purchase the water right. And each of those water rights are going to cost in the millions of dollars. They're a huge investment. And that leads to the question, if we're going to secure a large portfolio, how do we finance these deals? Well, in similar ways to how we finance many of our largest land deals, a combination of funding sources that are blended together. Traditional philanthropy and donations are always important. In fact, they're often the key to unlocking other sources of funding. Public funding is going to be really critical. It's often a major source of funding for us. It comes from different state and federal programs and often from state bonds that the public votes on that are a major source of conservation funding. And in fact, this November, we're really hoping that there's going to be a climate resilience bond on the ballot for the California voters that we've had a long role in crafting. And it has a lot of funding in there for this kind of work, but also a bunch of our other strategies in California. And then finally, a newer, more innovative funding model that we've been taking advantage of, which is low interest financing that allows us that we can pay back over time. And that's a financing model that we've actually recently just tested in our first acquisition for the trust. As of March 12th, we officially launched the Water Trust with a new water and land acquisition in the Lassen Foothills in Northern California. And what you see here is the Knobman Ranch. It's a 450-acre ranch that's adjacent to our Dye Creek Preserve, which is 35,000 acres. And along those runs Mill Creek, which dumps its cold spring and snowpack-fed water into the Sacramento River. And Mill Creek is a special place. It's one of the last strongholds for spring-run Chinook salmon in the Central Valley. And it's also home to the highest elevation migration for Chinook salmon in all of North America. And we purchased this property largely because of the senior water right that it has. And we used a blend of donations and low interest financing to make the purchase. So we're really excited that this year we're going to have the opportunity to leave our water in stream all summer instead of having that water get used for irrigating pasture. And that could prevent Mill Creek from going dry, as it does in many years because of agricultural diversions. And then we're going to transfer that water downstream and deliver it to refuges to deliver vital wetland habitat for birds in the fall. And despite these very nice late rains, this is likely to be a drought year, and the birds are probably going to desperately need it. So stay tuned for stories about this work. We're really excited about it. And it's the beginning of this work more broadly. Now, as I said earlier, we have set our ambitions on securing a large portfolio of water rights that we can use to deliver multiple benefits. And we want to do so in ways that lay the foundations for more dynamic water management more broadly. And this is really going to be our core priority. And we also have our eyes focused on making this internal water trust financially sustainable, which is really going to be a key to scalability. If we or others can, to do this for the long term, it's got to be reasonably sustainable from a financial perspective. And that means we're going to be looking for opportunities to strategically sell small amounts of our portfolio to other users, and then using that money to invest in more water assets, as well as pay back any loans we used to make the original purchases. And in some cases, the actual water buyers are environmental water users like national wildlife refuges, which often don't have all the water they need to meet their mission. And so they're going to be a priority target for us in using our water. And finally, we're going to be experimenting with ways to have the revenue we can generate through the water trust to fuel other programs like BirdReturns. And all of this work is going to enable us to assemble a portfolio of approximately 12,000 acre-feet or 4 billion gallons over the next few years, in the hopes of demonstrating the power of this concept. So, well, we have a ton of experience from here in California, as well as water work in Colorado and Australia and Texas and the Latin America. We're really just at the beginning of testing the power of this idea for dynamic water management. But everything we're learning about the pace at which climate change is affecting our world and the rate at which freshwater systems are being degraded tell us that this next 10 years is really a critical decade. And so what we're hoping is by working towards these more sustainable management solutions, we're going to be able to prevent the extinction of some of the things that make this a really special place. And by doing so, ensure that future generations live in a healthy and diverse world. That's why I personally feel very privileged to have the opportunity to work at an organization with an amazing team that's got the optimism, the ingenuity, and the tools to make this kind of big change. So thank you. And before we move on to questions, I'll leave you with a couple takeaways and some important things that you can do. The first is that dynamic water management, in other words, delivering water when and where nature needs it, is going to be a critical part of saving our freshwater ecosystems. And water trusts, like the work I just described, is going to be an important tool for institutionalizing that kind of management in California and beyond. And finally, you can make a difference and you can speak with your vote. So I encourage you, if the climate resilience bond shows up on the ballot this November or even in November 2022, please vote yes on that, and also support sustainable limits on water use in California.
Well, thank you so much, Rod, and thanks to all that joined us today. We really appreciate you spending an hour of your morning with us. So again, we hope you stay safe, stay protected, take solace in nature where you can, and join us again next Wednesday. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.